10. The Girof Site. The Girof Site in Iran is one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries ever made in the country. This place was first exposed thanks to flooding that happened back in the year 2001. It dates back to the Bronze Age, when it was once an expensive urban settlement built by a previously unknown civilization. The site is so old that experts believe it could actually be the true cradle of civilization and the first major societal hub, even predating the emergence of both Sumer and Mesopotamia. The excavated area has now been named Konar Sandal. It's not clear exactly who lived in this settlement or what they did. Archaeologists have uncovered a pair of huge burial mounds and a mysterious stone structure that they think may have been used for some kind of religious ceremony. Digging deeper in the soil, archaeologists also came across hidden buildings and small structures that may have comprised a subterranean living environment. Artifacts were also discovered here, including jewelry and ceramics. It's obvious the people here were pretty advanced in both technology and construction. It's also possible that whoever lived here shared an ancestry with Mesopotamia, since they were only separated by about 600 miles. 9. Alexandria Treasure Trove. In Alexandria, treasure from the ancient past has been unearthed thanks to a new riverfront development project. I'm talking about Alexandria, Virginia, not the city of Alexandria in Egypt. During the construction of the Robinson Landing community, artifacts were found dating all the way back to the conception of Alexandria in the year 1749, according to Eleanor Breen, a city archaeologist associated with the project. She described it as peeling back layers of time. The workers found foundation after foundation of old buildings that once stood proudly on Alexandria's shoreline. They also discovered the remains of wharfs, bulkheads, and even rotted ships. But how did all these features survive the passing of time? Well, in the 1940s, warehouses were built on concrete slabs over the top of these precious ruins. This helped to preserve the history buried beneath it all. At least 3 ship hulls were taken out of the earth. In total, a whopping 150,000 artifacts were excavated, most of them giving a shocking glimpse into the everyday life of settlers in the 18th century, such as teapots, wine bottles, and even food scraps. If you walk around Robinson Landing today, you can see old foundation stones made into raised planter walls, granite lines, and cobblestones that document the past of the shoreline. Some of these artifacts will go on display at museums when the archaeologists are done working on them. Everyone will be able to see them and engage with the beautiful history of Alexandria. 8. Quipu of Caral. Archaeologists have discovered a mysterious artifact at the location of the oldest known city in the Americas. The city is called Caral, and it dates back 5,000 years to the first complex civilization in South America. The artifact discovered is known as a quipu, and it's a type of device made of fabric knots and strings which ancient people used to convey information. If it sounds confusing, that's because it is. Today we have cell phones. Back then they had knots and strings. It is amazing what a few thousand years can do, right? Anyways, a quipu was like a notebook, but you had to know how to read the knots. The Inca used them starting at around 650 AD, but the people at Caral were using them much earlier than that. According to archaeologist Ruth Shady, the quipu dates back to the original construction of Caral. She also says it's the oldest of its kind and that it shows a very unique system of writing that would go on to last 4,500 years until the arrival of the Spanish settlers. Just what exactly is this object though? It's a network of brown cotton strings bound with thin sticks and strange fiber balls of varying size. All these individual features are wrapped inside of nets and reed baskets, almost like an extremely complicated dream catcher. It could be used to record dates, different accounts, certain statistics, and even simple ideas. Do you think you could use a quipu to communicate with your friends and family today? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 7. The Brother of Jesus Inscription. One of the most controversial archaeological discoveries ever made is known as the James Ossuary. It's a bone box, a simple crate made from limestone that has a very specific inscription on it. Written in Aramaic is, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. This is controversial for obvious reasons. First of all, if real, the inscription would be the earliest mention of Jesus anywhere. It would also suggest the box once held the bones of Jesus' brother. Wait a minute, Jesus had a brother? This was such an incredibly shocking discovery when it was made back in the early 2000s. It was so shocking that authentication was understandably necessary. The box itself was dated back to the 1st century AD. There's no doubt that the bone box is old, very, very old. The antiquity of the 20-inch long James ossuary itself is not in question. It does indeed date back to a period when the practice of ossulegium, which is the collection of the bones of a deceased person, was prevalent among the Jewish population. It was the inscription that really needed to be scrutinized though. And during a trial that went on for 7 years, professionals from all over the world tried to figure out if it was a forgery or not. The issue was that 2 renowned paleographers confirmed that the inscription was real. But then over the course of the trial, which included 138 witnesses and 400 exhibits, it came to be known that there was a forgery ring involved in the discovery who had actually faked the inscription. The bone box is definitely real, but nobody wrote anything about Jesus on it. It was all a very, very elaborate hoax. It was the greatest forgery of the century. But what would the reasoning behind it be? Just to mess with people's heads? 6. Nebra Sky Dis. The Nebra Sky Dis is the oldest representation of an astronomical phenomenon. It was discovered back in the year 1999 by Henry Westphal while he was out hunting for treasure with one of his good friends in Germany. The disc was discovered with a pair of bronze swords, 2 hatchets, a spiral bracelet, and a chisel. It was dated back to 1600 BC originally, though researchers believe it could have been made even earlier than that, perhaps in the Bronze Age. This is such an important artifact that it has been included in the UNESCO Memory of the World Register as one of the most important finds of the 20th century. But what exactly was the sky disc used for? It is a bronze disc about a foot in diameter, inlaid with gold. The disc shows the sun and the moon, along with the cluster of 7 stars known as the Pleiades. It's so impressive because never before had someone created an astrological representation quite like it. The artist had probably been observing the heavens at night from atop the Middelburg mountain, near the town of Nebra, where the artifact was found. 5. Roman estate. Something horrible happened in the United Kingdom. It all began with the amazing discovery of a Roman estate and bathhouse in the rural community of Eastfield. No one had any idea that it was there. Archaeologists couldn't believe their luck. According to Historic England, it was the most important Roman discovery of the last 10 years. The estate was found ahead of a new construction project for a housing development. Archaeologists were called in to survey the area and were shocked when they found the remains of the large complex. So far, this site is about the size of 2 tennis courts combined. It was likely an impressive estate used by someone of high standing during the Roman occupation of England roughly 2,000 years ago. But here's the horrible part. Just after the discovery was made and reported in local news, a group of vandals trespassed on the site one night under the cover of darkness. These vandals brought with them metal detectors, probably hoping to discover some priceless artifacts. They didn't completely ruin the estate, but they did damage many of the important structures. Keith Emmerich, Inspector of Ancient Monuments at Historic England, told the BBC, "We are aware of a number of incidents of illegal activity at the site of the newly discovered Roman building at Eastfield over the past week. As the archaeological potential of the area has been publicly known for some time, it is a hotspot for illegal metal detecting, also known as night hawking. Who knows what else could have been uncovered before the hoodlums snuck in and stole stuff." 4. Spla. The archaeological site of Spla in Tunisia is home to the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Soufatula. Here you will find the best preserved Roman temples anywhere in all of Tunisia. It is an impressive site for a few different reasons. Mainly that the city was founded under the reign of Emperor Vespasian of Rome and then stuck in the middle of several big confrontations, including fighting between the Byzantines and the Arabs in the year 647. It was also the base that was used later on for the Muslim conquest, which pushed its way into Europe. There are still many incredible finds being made here all the time, from a rare Roman bath to an exceptional baptistry basin found in the Basilica of Vitalis, crafted in the 5th century and decorated with a beautiful fish mosaic. Would you like to see this in person? Let us know in the comment section down below. 3. The Serpent Staff. One of the coolest artifacts ever was just discovered, thanks to archaeologists working with the University of Turku and the Finnish Heritage Agency. At a prehistoric site in the southwest of Finland, first discovered by people digging a ditch in the 1950s, an ancient serpent staff that may have held magical powers was excavated in 2019. How cool is that? Because of the state of the soil, the wooden staff has been kept perfectly preserved for about 4,400 long years. The staff measures about 3 feet long and was sculpted to look like a slithering serpent. From what archaeologists can tell, it was probably used during the Stone Age by a shaman who practiced extremely mysterious rituals. Archaeologists also say it's unlike anything else ever found in Europe, dating back to the Neolithic times. Other than a few snakes depicted in cave art, this is the oldest and most obvious representation of a snake. According to Dr. Antti Lähelma from the University of Helsinki, there was a distinct connection between these ancient people and serpents. Snakes almost always had a role in shamanistic activities. However, it's impossible to say what exactly these activities were. Lead author of this study, Dr. Satu Koivisto, principal investigator of the Arvensuo research from the University of Turku, said, "Well-preserved finds from wetlands help our understanding of ancient peoples and the landscape where they performed both mundane and sacred activities." Along with the magical staff, archaeologists found the remains of unknown structures, scraps of fishing equipment, and early wooden utensils. These all came from an ancient culture who lived in the wetlands, fishing for their food and participating in bizarre rituals. 2. Mysterious Roman sarcophagus. Archaeologists have uncovered a very strange sarcophagus in England. It happened during renovations at the historical Sydney Gardens in the old Roman city of Bath. A group of archaeologists discovered a stone sarcophagus buried underneath the dirt of the world-famous gardens. It has been dated all the way back to when England was at the farthest extent of the Roman Empire, roughly 2,000 years ago. The archaeologists also discovered a pair of skeletons inside the single coffin. Both skeletons faced north, indicating that they were probably part of a pagan burial. They were also found with the partial skeleton of an unknown person entombed at their feet, possibly their child. While nothing specific is really known about these ancient buried people, it is fascinating to know that there are still undiscovered sarcophagi hidden literally underneath our very feet, in gardens just waiting to be uncovered. Do you think something else is hidden there waiting to be uncovered? If so, what do you think it is? 1. Trondholm Sun Chariot. The Trondholm Sun Chariot is a unique Nordic artifact discovered in Denmark and dating back to the earliest part of the Bronze Age, around 1400 BC. It was discovered by a farmer in 1902 who was plowing a peat bog. He spotted the bronze horse lying in the mud and thought it was nothing but an old child's toy. So he gave it to his kids. It wasn't until much later that the National Museum of Denmark got involved to properly preserve the artifact. Then, approximately 96 years after the horse was discovered, archaeologists with metal detectors went back to the original site and found 21 more pieces of the Sun Chariot, putting it together to create an impressive relic, the horse joined to a chariot with wheels, axles, and spokes. It turned out to be a very impressive find. This is an important artifact because it is so far the best example of Scandinavian Bronze Age religion. The relic shows the passage of the sun as it moves through the light of heaven and the grim darkness of the underworld. There are motifs displaying the same thing throughout Scandinavia, usually carved into rocks. In Nordic mythology, the sun goddess is Sol. She travels through the sky in her chariot, keeping all life on Earth from plunging into darkness.
Number 9. Secret door in the Sphinx. For centuries now, Egypt's Great Pyramids and Sphinx of Giza have frequently fallen under the spotlight for their suspected secret chambers, among other mysterious features, including hopeful theories about lost treasure. These rumors are to credit for the ongoing interest among archaeologists in getting to the bottom of any possible truths behind the tales. In August of 2019, the 4,500-year-old Great Sphinx made headlines yet again, when reputed British historian Dr. Bettany Hughes claimed that there are 2 hidden chambers beneath the famous yet little understood monument that are worth excavating for their potential loot. and for the secrets they may reveal about ancient Egypt. Speaking with The Sun, Dr. Hughes explained that for generations, ancient Egyptians feared and respected the Sphinx, believing it had supernatural powers. Now, she says, archaeologists are investigating the statue based on suspicions that it may sit atop an ancient network of tunnels and chambers. At the base of the Sphinx, near its tail, there's a small, deep hole, which is typically kept hidden from public view. This hole could lead to the larger chamber that some researchers believe is beneath the monument. Although researchers have yet to confirm any suspicions, Dr. Hughes believes that the tunnels below the Sphinx could be linked to a nearby pyramid, where the pharaoh Khufu is entombed. But she admits nobody knows for sure, and it's precisely the mystery researchers are trying to solve. Number 8. Crooked Forest. In 1930, when the village of Nowe Czarnowo in modern-day West Pomerania, Poland, was part of the German province of Pomerania, somebody planted 400 pine trees that grew peculiarly pointed northward and curved back upright. Nobody knows why the entire grove appears to be sharply bent 90 degrees sideways. The bizarrely shaped trees are otherwise healthy, growing up to 50 feet or 15 meters tall. Some have theorized that a unique gravitational pull in the area is responsible for reshaping them. But science proved long ago that gravity pulls downwards rather than at an angle, as Discovery points out on its website. Another theory suggests that heavy snowfall caused the trees to bend when they were sprouting, but fails to explain why this never happened to other vegetation in the region. The direction of the wood's grain makes it very tough, leading some to speculate that the trees were deliberately grown at an angle for building wooden wheels. This falls in line with the most commonly accepted theory that farmers manipulated the trees. Based on where they're angled, this would have been done when they were 7 to 10 years old. Anyone who may have an answer to the mystery is long gone from the town, which was largely abandoned at the end of World War II and remained that way until the 1970s. Number 7. Pomsky Crater. The Pomsky Crater is a peculiar rock formation in southeastern Siberia's Irkutsk region. Made from shattered limestone blocks, it stands roughly 130 feet or about 40 meters tall, and has a base diameter of 520 feet or 160 meters. At the top is a ring-shaped cone with a smaller 39-foot tall, about 12-meter mound in the center. The crater's origins have been a mystery ever since its discovery in 1949 by Russian geologist Vadim Korpakov. With an estimated age of just 300 to 350 years old, theories abound, including the possibilities of meteorite, volcanic, or gaseous activity forming the crater, as well as possible radioactivity, as evidenced by trees nearby that show signs of accelerated growth. As of 2010, the general consensus was that the Pomsky Crater has geological origins, although some scientists still believe it's meteoric in nature. No solid argument for a meteoric theory has been offered as of yet, and most modern experts consider it historically valuable at best. Some of the more imaginative theories connect the site with a suspected hidden nuclear plant, or a buried UFO containing nuclear fuel. But no asteroid-like materials or metal have been discovered in or around the crater, making these possibilities highly unlikely. Recent research suggests that perhaps a gas volcano formed by the underground release of hydrogen and other fluids caused the trees near the crater to grow abnormally fast. Speaking with the Siberian Times, researcher Alexander Pospiev admitted that scientists don't yet know how the Pomsky Crater formed, but that it's definitely of earthly origin. Number 6. Marfa Lights. Near US Route 67, outside the West Texas town of Marfa, mysterious orbs of light glow in the desert at night, leading to generations of speculation about paranormal phenomena and a suspected extraterrestrial presence. Eyewitnesses have claimed that the lights are basketball-sized and appear in various colors, including white, blue, and yellow and red, according to Live Science. They move in ways that distinguish them from vehicle headlights or the lights of nearby ranches, often hovering, twinkling, merging, dividing, flickering, and ascending towards the sky. The Marfa Lights are seemingly unpredictable, occurring in various types of weather. They're spotted around a dozen times every year, and nobody knows for sure what they are. The first known eyewitness accounts of the Marfa Lights dates back to 1883. But when a cowhand named Robert Reed Ellison saw them and assumed they were Apache fires. But no evidence of campfires was found in the area where the lights were seen. During World War II, Army pilots stationed nearby tried to track down the source of the Marfa Lights, but had no luck. According to local Native American beliefs, the lights represent fallen stars. Others attribute them to aliens from outer space and the ghosts of Spanish conquistadors. A study by physics students from the University of Texas at Dallas found that the lights could be an atmospheric reflection of headlights and campfires, but the findings were inconclusive, leaving the topic open for debate. It's possible that the phenomenon is an optical illusion consisting of light refractions caused by layers of air at different temperatures. Known as a fata morgana or a superior mirage, this happens when warm air rests above a layer of cooler air. The Marfa Lights could also be caused by gases like phosphine and methane, which also comprise swamp gas and sometimes ignite when they interact with oxygen. This glowing phenomenon is sometimes called will-o'-the-wisp or fool's fire. For now, there's no solid evidence of what the Marfa Lights are, making your guess as good as anyone else's. Have you ever seen anything weird in the sky? Did you figure out what it was? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to Titanic and let us know what videos you'd like to see in the comments below. Number 5. Racetrack Playa. In Death Valley National Park, there's a lake bed sitting 3,714 feet, about 1,130 meters above sea level, known as the Racetrack Playa. Measuring 2.8 miles, about 4.5 kilometers long, by 1.3 miles or 2.1 kilometers wide. It's so flat that the northern end is only an inch and a half, about 3.5 centimeters, higher than the southern end. Most of the time, the Racetrack Playa is dry. But when it rains heavily, the basin it's situated in fills up with water and washes down from the surrounding mountains, forming a shallow lake. Known as an endorheic lake, it's a temporary body of water that quickly evaporates under the hot Southern California sun, leaving behind a soft layer of mud that dries and cracks into octagonal shapes. With the area only receiving a few inches of rainfall every year, the playa is almost always dry. When the lake bed is covered in soft mud, the rocks along its floor move, leaving a trail in the mud behind them. Some of them weigh hundreds of pounds, begging the question of how and why they slowly scuttle along, seemingly for no reason. One prevailing theory over the years is that strong winds push the rocks against the flat ground. This makes sense, since they move parallel to the prevailing winds, which blow from the southwest to the northeast. But even strong winds usually can't push a rock that weighs hundreds of pounds, and which is sitting inches deep in the mud, suggesting there are other factors at play. In 2013, a 3-inch deep lake filled the playa and froze over. During that time, researchers observed rocks actively moving across the ground, with some traveling over 700 feet or about 215 meters. The scientists found that the phenomenon occurs when ice sheets measuring a few millimeters thick begin to melt, creating opportune conditions for light winds to push the rocks along while they're embedded in the ice, which floats on a thin layer of water. Number 4. Oregon Vortex. Located along Sardine Creek in Gold Hill, Oregon, the Oregon Vortex opened in 1930 as a roadside attraction, advertising itself as a spherical field of force, half above the ground and half below the ground. In more basic terms, things seem to move and lean in the wrong direction, with water flowing uphill, rooms standing on end, and people's height unexplainably changing. Native Americans referred to the site as Forbidden Ground, and reportedly avoided going there, and their horses allegedly refused to go there, stopping and changing directions once they realized they were near. Between the 1920s and 1959, Scottish geologist and engineer John Lister conducted thousands of experiments at the Oregon Vortex. And he is also who opened and ran it as an attraction. The site's advertisement as a spherical force field is based on Lister's theory about what causes the strange going-ons there. He believes that his alleged field of force measures a little less than 165 feet, about 50 meters, in diameter. Today, the owner and proprietors continue to sell the Oregon Vortex as a site of possible paranormal phenomena. A more plausible explanation is that people who visit experience an optical illusion known as a gravity hill, which is when a slight downhill slope appears to be uphill due to the layout of its surroundings. In 2012, the Sci-Fi Channel show Fact or Faked Paranormal Files investigated the Oregon Vortex and concluded that all the bizarre effects people experience there are indeed probably the products of optical illusions. But the show's findings were admittedly inconclusive, leaving the site's strange happenings a mystery for now. Number 3. Gungi Wamp. Located in a forest less than an hour inside of New Haven, Connecticut, the Gungi Wamp site contains evidence of hundreds or even thousands of years of human occupation. Characterized by multiple stone chambers, rock piles, rings of stones, and mysterious carvings, the ancient settlement is filled with a confusing mixture of Native American and colonial artifacts, with the oldest finds dating as far back as 2000 BCE. Among the most notable finds at Gungi Wamp are a stone chamber featuring the astronomical alignment of the equinoxes and a formation of large quarried stones arranged in 2 concentric circles. There are also multiple stone chambers that archaeologists believe were root cellars, but truthfully do not know the purpose of. Other discoveries include Native American pottery fragments and arrowheads, as well as colonial-era china, buttons, coins, tobacco pipes, glass bottle and window fragments, bricks, and animal bones. None of these artifacts are helpful in determining what the stone chambers were used for. On the surface, it's clear that the 100-acre or about 40 hectare site was repurposed multiple times throughout its history. But archaeologists have struggled to make sense of the muddled mess of structures and artifacts or put together a precise timeline or order to Gungi Wamp's occupation. One of the more far-flung theories, put forth by mostly non-academic investigators, is that the settlement is of pre-Columbian Celtic origins and was built in the 6th century by Christian monks fleeing persecution in Europe. But no evidence points towards this as a likely possibility, despite the discovery in Newfoundland, Canada in recent years of pre-Columbian Norse populations in North America. Some people even believe that there are alien connections to Gungi Wamp, citing the alleged presence of energy vortexes at the site, based on occasional detectable spikes in electromagnetic activity, which geologists more convincingly attribute to the quartz, granite, and magnite rocks at the site. But, in all fairness, the mysteries surrounding Gungi Wamp and modern scholars' failure to come up with a more comprehensive explanation of its history open the door to these types of beliefs. Number 2. Amaram Muru. While exploring the Peruvian countryside near the Bolivian border during the early 1990s, mountaineering guide Jose Luis Delgado Mamani found an abandoned stone carving bearing a smooth, flat surface and 6.5 foot tall, about 2 meters, T-shaped alcove. Situated near Lake Titicaca, the roughly 23-foot or 7-meter stone resembles a portal. It's known to be an abandoned Incan construction project, but its purpose is unknown. Known as Amaram Muru and nicknamed Puerta de Jayamarca, or Gate of the Gods, the structure is the subject of local folklore, claiming that people have disappeared through its doorway. Stories also tell of strange sights near the portal, including tall men accompanied by glowing balls of lights walking through the doorway, according to Atlas Obscura. But the website admits that these tales could be embellished by paranormal fanatics like Jerry Willis, who claimed that he traveled through the portal and that photos of people goofing off near the structure do little to add to its mystique. Conspiracy theorists have suggested that Amaram Muru is a multi-dimensional doorway created by aliens. And one story alleges that an Incan priest used a golden disc that fell from the sky to open the door. Unsurprisingly, none of these claims are backed by credible evidence. Number 1. Hestelan Lights. For over a century, bizarre, flashing balls of light have been appearing in rural central Norway's Hestelan Valley. Known as the Hestelan Lights or the Hestelan phenomenon, the bright white, yellow, and red lights are of unknown origin. They appear day and night, both above and below the horizon, and last anywhere from a few seconds to a few hours. Spectators have observed the lights moving slowly and with enormous speed, as well as hovering. People have also reported seeing metallic objects in the sky during the daytime, as well as bright blue flashes that last no longer than the blink of an eye, giving rise to rumors about UFOs and aliens from outer space. There have been periods of unusually high activity, including during the 1980s when the lights appeared as much as 20 times per week. Since then, the number of annual sightings has dwindled to fewer than 20. The phenomenon has attracted the attention of scientists and conspiracy theorists, but both have failed to determine what it is or what causes it. One theory put forth in 2014 suggests that metallic minerals interact with a sulfurous river, creating a natural battery of sorts that illuminates the sky. The researchers replicated this effect in an experiment, lending potential credibility to their suspicions. A type of plasma could be responsible for the Hestelan lights, according to some experts, while others believe the phenomenon is a type of lightning. But there are pitfalls to each hypothesis. For one, plasmas require incredibly hot temperatures to form, and the lights seem to be cool. The lights also do not occur during lightning or leave scorch marks on the ground, challenging the idea that they are a type of lightning. Other theories include the possibility that the valley's shape, climate, geology, and high winds generate static electricity, or that radioactivity or decaying radon in the atmosphere are responsible for the lights. Whatever the case, more research is necessary before the scientific community can solve the mystery.
Immediate effects. In the days and hours leading up to an eruption of Mount Vesuvius, the surrounding region would likely experience tremors and earthquakes, much like the residents of Pompeii did on that fateful day. An eruption as strong, or possibly stronger than the one that destroyed Pompeii, would shoot a plume of volcanic material at least 20 miles into the sky, causing rock and ash to rain down at over 100 miles per hour. In many places, the sky would go dark, and there would be an initial intense burst of heat. When Pompeii was swallowed by ash, there was a 900-degree Fahrenheit heat wave. Around 80 people were killed instantly by the extreme thermal shock, and this would certainly be the case today for anyone in the heat wave's path. Unfortunate residents who failed to evacuate on time would get crushed and buried by the debris, which would fall too quickly for someone to escape on foot. The extent of the damage caused by an eruption would depend not only on the size of the explosion itself, but the weather conditions during the disaster. High winds would cause the ash and pumice to travel further away from the volcano, expanding the impacted region. 9. Displacement and Death. Scientists at the Vesuvius Observatory monitor the volcano's seismic activity 24/7 so that they could give people as much warning as possible to evacuate in the event of an impending eruption. At least 18 towns are in the so-called red zone, which is defined by a 9-mile radius around the volcano. The Italian government's emergency evacuation plan is designed to relocate at least 600,000 people who live in the most at-risk areas to safety within 72 hours. In 2018, officials announced that red zone residents would be shuttled to Sardinia by boat, and that Pompeii's mayor, Pietro Amatrano, was working with Sardinian authorities to develop a comprehensive evacuation procedure. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that everyone would survive. Things often go wrong, or at least don't go as planned amid widespread chaos. Naturally, some people would be hesitant to evacuate, as this is a common problem in the face of an oncoming disaster, and there could be logistical challenges to moving hundreds of thousands of people in such a short time. According to CBC News, some experts estimate that as many as 10,000 people would die if Vesuvius erupted at full magnitude. There would likely be some stranded survivors in imminent need of rescue. Their fate would depend largely on the government's response readiness and its capacity to aid the amount of people waiting to be taken out of harm's way. Efforts are being made to reduce the population living within the volcano's danger zone. Authorities are offering residents as much as $46,000 to move away and are destroying illegally constructed buildings. And there's a national park being established around Vesuvius to stop new homes from being built. 8. Failed evacuation. A successful evacuation of the red zone would require officials to act diligently and with competence. Authorities might fail to take warnings of an impending eruption seriously, perhaps writing these cautions off as false alarms. It might sound crazy to underestimate the life-threatening dangers of Mount Vesuvius, especially after history has proven how quickly and easily the volcano can destroy entire towns and thousands of lives. But back in 1984, around 40,000 residents were evacuated from the city of Pozzuoli and temporarily resettled in resort towns following seismic events in the nearby Campi Flegrei caldera. No eruption happened, which is undoubtedly a good thing, but it's impossible to avoid chaos while relocating tens or hundreds of thousands of people. Politicians and officials are likely to be extremely cautious or perhaps even hesitant about moving forward with the decision to evacuate people en masse. An unnecessary evacuation could destroy a leader's image or even their entire career, as Vesuvius Observatory Research Director Giovanni Macedonio told USA Today in 2003. For this reason, it's realistic to consider the possibility that a person in a position of authority would delay an evacuation, resulting in needless tragedies. Would you live near a volcano knowing it could erupt any day? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 7. Villages would be wiped off the map. Depending on the size of an eruption, Mount Vesuvius could easily wipe villages and small cities off the map completely, including Naples, potentially displacing 3 million or more people who live in the area surrounding the volcano. History has already proven that the effects of an eruption could be even farther reaching than the one that buried Pompeii and nearby Herculaneum in ash in 79 AD. Around 3,800 years ago, an eruption at least twice as strong happened, covering the area that includes modern-day Naples. Known as the Avellino eruption, it turned the region into a barren, uninhabitable wasteland for at least 200 years, according to a Life Science article detailing a groundbreaking study from 2006. The research provided scientists with the first solid evidence that the blast extended so far. Study leader Michael Sheridan from the University of Buffalo reported that over 3 feet of pumice and hot ash rained down as far as 9 miles away. Located roughly 6 miles from Vesuvius, Naples falls well within that zone. Archaeological evidence shows that the lesser-known Avellino eruption devastated human and animal lives. At Nola, a prehistoric village located 9 miles from the volcano, archaeologists found dog skeletons and the remains of 9 pregnant goats. They also discovered the skeletons of a man and a woman who suffocated to death while trying to escape and being buried in debris. Footprints found in volcanic ash indicate that most of the 10,000 people who lived near Vesuvius at the time probably survived. But the scenario would play out much differently today, possibly leaving millions of people homeless and forced to resettle elsewhere, in many cases, permanently. 6. Life would be severely disrupted. Those who managed to survive an eruption among the 3 million people living in or near the red zone would face devastating consequences. Countless homes would be completely buried in ash, much like the ancient village of Pompeii was back in 79 AD. Nearby areas that are not destroyed would lose electricity, running water, and access to transportation for months or longer. An unprecedented number of evacuees would be stuck in temporary housing, including people whose homes were destroyed and those who are unable to return home for months or even years. With so many people living in closer than usual proximity to one another, disease could spread more easily, and at least some survivors would suffer from respiratory issues from inhaling volcanic ash. Medical care would likely be more difficult to access, food may be scarce, and starvation could become a problem. Not to mention, almost all the evacuees would lose their jobs for a variety of reasons, including because their workplace was destroyed, because they've been displaced far away from their job, and because there would be other, more pressing matters at hand. But even people living far outside the red zone would feel the effects of the disaster. In fact, if Vesuvius erupted, it would impact pretty much the entire world in some way. As ash blanketed the sky, air traffic and shipping throughout Europe would grind to a months-long halt. disrupting everything from travel to the supply of goods and the global economy. Again, why would you risk living near something so dangerous? 5. Climate change. A big enough explosion from Vesuvius would likely trigger climate change. In many places, the sky would go dark for some time, and soon enough, the covering of ash blowing, blocking out the sun's rays, could cause global temperatures to drop. At the very least, these changes would disrupt agriculture in some places, causing crop failure and food shortages. People experienced one such scenario after the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia. Ash shot as high as 25 miles into the atmosphere and rained down for weeks, causing global temperatures to drop by an average of 5 degrees for several months. It was the only eruption in modern history to rate a 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, and people as far away as Western Europe and Eastern North America experienced crop failures, famine, and starvation. The effects were as far-reaching as the US and other parts of the Northern Hemisphere. 1816 came to be known as the year without a summer. The Mount Tambora disaster was the most destructive volcanic eruption to happen in the last 10,000 years, and some experts believe that a Vesuvius eruption could be just as devastating. Not only do they think that the volcano is overdue for an eruption, it sits atop a massive 154 square mile layer of magma that's been accumulating since the last time it erupted in 1944. It's entirely possible that the effects would be similar to and nearly as severe as those of the Mount Tambora eruption. 4. Economic despair. To say that Italy's economy would be hard hit by a massive eruption is an understatement. Not factoring in any long-term housing and other needs for refugees, the disaster alone would cost a minimum of $20 billion. Local businesses would be destroyed, and people who work in or around the red zone would lose their jobs. The region's tourism industry, which is one of its primary sources of revenue, would cease to exist indefinitely. Survivors with jobs outside the red zone might face logistical, health, and other challenges that prevent them from continuing to work. Hundreds of thousands of people, or more, would become government dependent overnight, and the already struggling Italian economy would face the additional financial strain of having to provide temporary housing and basic provisions, like food and medical care, for everyone affected by the disaster. People affected by the disaster would probably have less money to contribute to the consumer economy. At the very least, their priorities would change, and purchases of non-essential and luxury goods would decline as they focus on rebuilding their lives. The European and global economies would also suffer amid widespread shipping and travel disruptions. 3. Lost history. When you think about all the work that's gone into unburying Pompeii, which is still being excavated to this day, it's shocking to realize that the site could be instantaneously reburied if and when the next big eruption occurs. The Italian government would be faced with two choices: leave the area around Mount Vesuvius covered in ash, or excavate it. Considering the overwhelming costs associated with evacuating, rescuing, and providing ongoing aid to survivors, it's highly unlikely that authorities would opt to dig up any of the modern or ancient towns anytime soon after an eruption. While ash seems to be great at preserving ruins, it could effectively block access to Pompeii and other ancient sites for decades or longer, until or unless it's deemed feasible and worthwhile to excavate. There's still plenty we haven't learned about these villages amid ongoing digs. If they were once again swallowed in ash, we would no longer have the option of seeing them firsthand, and research would stop in its tracks. Our experience of Pompeii would be limited to photographs, written materials, and any artifacts that have been removed and relocated elsewhere. Experts claim that Vesuvius is overdue for a massive eruption, so it might be a good idea to go and visit these historic sites while we still can. There's no guarantee that this alleged impending disaster will happen during our lifetimes, but there's also no guarantee that it won't. 2. Medical crises. If Mount Vesuvius erupted, not all survivors would emerge unscathed. There would undoubtedly be injuries, and many people would likely suffer from respiratory problems due to inhaling ash. Diseases would spread more easily in cramped temporary housing, where evacuees would live in unusually close proximity to one another. Additionally, maintaining high standards of hygiene and medical treatment would be difficult in these makeshift conditions, and in the face of a skyrocketing need for care. Keeping the population healthy would be especially difficult amid the ongoing global coronavirus pandemic. Italy was one of the hardest hit countries and is still recovering from its devastating effects. Like much of the world, the country still has not reached the level of pre-COVID normalcy, and the deadly Delta variant of the virus is gaining traction even as vaccinations are on the rise. The medical consequences stemming from a volcanic eruption and the displacement of millions, especially during a pandemic, would massively burden Italy's healthcare system, coming at an immense humanitarian and economic cost. 1. Forgotten towns. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD rendered the surrounding region uninhabitable for centuries to come. People had no choice but to move away, and towns that were buried like Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Estabiai were eventually forgotten about. Pompeii was not rediscovered until 1748, nearly 1,670 years after the eruption. Historical record-keeping has come a long way since then, so it's doubtful that Naples and other towns would be completely lost to history, even if they were concealed by ash. But people would probably never come back to the area not only because of the damage caused by the eruption, but because the Italian government probably wouldn't allow them to return for obvious safety reasons. And the collective memories of these towns would undoubtedly fade with time as people move on with their lives and new generations are born, leaving survivors' descendants with no physical place to visit and see firsthand. Their experiences of the places their ancestors came from would be limited to stories passed down through families, relics like photographs, and their imaginations. The ruins at Pompeii are remarkable, because it's as if they're frozen in time. Ash buried the settlement so quickly, it stopped life in its tracks. Human remains were found in the helpless positions that the victims died in, as they attempted to shield themselves from the deadly debris falling from overhead. If Naples or other surrounding towns were buried in a modern eruption and unearthed decades or centuries later, they would likely be well preserved, much like Pompeii was. In this sense, the unusually intact ruins would offer an unprecedented glimpse into the past and into the final moments before they were snuffed out. Number 10, the Mayan disappearance. Archaeologists have been baffled for centuries over the Great Mayan Disappearance. The Maya are, to this day, the most well-known ancient civilization anywhere in the Americas, besides maybe the Inca. The lost civilization was rediscovered in the 1800s, and since then, archaeologists have investigated hundreds of complex historic sites. The Maya used to live throughout much of southern Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala. They've built impressive temples in amazing cities, such as Tikal and the famous Chichen Itza, and they accomplished incredible scientific feats for their time, showing an incredible understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. However, despite their accomplishments and knowledge, they vanished into thin air about 1,000 years ago, after inhabiting their lands and cities since 2600 BC. There have been a lot of theories as to where the Maya went. Some say overpopulation killed them. Some say it was an environmental disaster, and others say they were destroyed by warfare. Some creative minds even theorize aliens were behind the ordeal. But we know today that their greatest cities were vacated one by one, seemingly for no reason. From Mexico to Honduras, the Maya simply walked off the map. This is incredible if you think about how many of them there were. The Maya population has been estimated at 20 million. That was a lot of people for back then, and nearly the population of all of Australia today. But after the collapse of their society, only 5% of them were left. So where exactly did they go? Number 9, the Caral Civilization. The Caral Civilization was part of a larger complex society known as the Norte Chico, residing in the northern coastal region of Peru. The Caral people lived in a complicated urban capital that took up about 150 acres, filled with temples, dwellings, and impressive plazas. Amazingly, not a single piece of evidence has been found linking the Caral people to war, suggesting they were entirely peaceful, relying strictly on agriculture and seafood to sustain themselves. At its peak, about 3,000 people lived in Caral, which made it a pretty bustling city for its time. They flourished about 5,000 years ago in 3500 BC as the first known civilization anywhere in the Americas. They had a sophisticated government, they used textiles, and they worshipped strange deities. Their decline started slowly around 1800 BC after millennia of thriving. The issue is that the Caral Civilization was the first in South America. It was inevitable that other centers of power would develop. As more powerful kingdoms rose up throughout what is now Peru, the Caral people were in for a rough time, especially since they weren't a warring society. Historians don't know exactly what happened, but they do know there was a gradual exodus from the capital, with people slowly spreading to other regions until the city collapsed. Number 8. The Nubian Kingdom. Almost everything scholars know about the ancient Nubian Kingdom comes from Egyptian sources. Nubia never really left behind any written accounts of their beliefs or their history, and because the monuments built by the ancient civilization have mostly been destroyed or are so weathered that inscriptions left on them are almost impossible to decipher, researchers don't have much to go on. However, there are still some impressive feats of engineering to be found in ancient Nubia or modern-day Sudan, such as the mud brick temple of Defufa, constructed over 4,000 years ago to be the center of spirituality in ancient Nubia, located today in the Sudanese desert. It's not much to look at anymore, barely even a temple, but it was once an amazing structure and a representation of one of the greatest African powers. Being over 5 stories tall, it overlooked the nearby Nubian city back in the year 2500 BC. Defufa consisted of multiple levels, stairs leading to a platform on its roof, and multiple subterranean chambers. Even today, it's not clear what kind of worship went on at this temple. Historians believe it was part of a greater city, but all traces of that city have since been annihilated. The Nubians were constantly at war with the Egyptians, with the pharaohs invading and conquering Nubia, and the Nubian kings sometimes invading and conquering Egypt until Nubia slowly faded into the history books, with many people never hearing of the once powerful Nubian civilization due to the lack of knowledge and evidence left behind. It can make one wonder, what other lost civilizations could be out there? Number 7. The Minoans. The island of Crete in modern Greece was once home to the ancient civilization of the Minoans. These people were famous for their elaborate structures and palaces, their beautiful artworks, and their profound trading connections throughout much of the Old World, including the kingdoms of Egypt and Mesopotamia. A recent discovery has unveiled one of the most impressive features of old Minoan society. The ruins of an ancient palace near the port of Heraklion have been excavated by professional archaeologists. It was an extraordinary structure with over 1,300 rooms, large enough to hold stores of grain and treasure, complete with drainage and pipes, and beautifully decorated. What archaeologists found recently was a magnificent throne room, one that they say is the oldest intact throne room anywhere in all of Europe. The king sat on a throne crafted from pure gypsum stone. The room's site also contained a large stone bowl. Researchers believe was used for religious rituals. There's also artworks in the form of frescoes along the walls showing images of griffins, a mythological creature with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle. Despite the remarkable room, it is unknown who exactly it was built for. Some of the archaeologists think it may have been purely for decoration or used only for important ceremonies. Others think it was reserved for one of the gods or goddesses the Minoans worship. Unfortunately for this great culture, they came under the control of mainland Greece around the year 1500 BC, falling soon after when much of their society was destroyed by a brutal earthquake. Who do you think the beautiful and important room was built for? Let us know in the comments section below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons too. Number 6. The Araru Civilization. A castle dating back 2,800 years has recently been investigated by archaeologists from Turkey. The castle was erected by an ancient civilization called Urartu. Not much is known about the Urartu, other than how they controlled parts of Turkey and Armenia for a short time between the 9th century BC and the 6th century BC. Their history remains obscure because they didn't leave behind any written sources and because of where they had ruled. It was under constant siege by the Assyrians and other ancient forces and had traded hands dozens of times throughout history. Take this ancient castle as an example. The Urartu may have constructed it. Dr. Rafet Çavuşoğlu has compared it to other castles found in the Urartian era, but it was likely occupied by a handful of foreign forces like the Armenians, Romans, Parthians, Ottomans, Byzantines, and Persians. It's still an impressive feat of architecture and ability though, since the site was discovered on top of a massive mountain. In other words, even though the Urartu made so many impressive fortresses thousands of years ago, their creations were taken over and often destroyed by the powerful civilizations that came after them. They lost all control of the region after being defeated by the Assyrians in the 7th century. Number 5. Queen of the Moocha. The Lady of Cow is considered to be the most powerful woman who lived in ancient Peru. Her mummy was found less than 2 decades ago inside a tomb in the Cau Viejo temple on the northern coast. According to archaeologist Regulo Franco, who was the one to unveil the amazing discovery of her preserved corpse, She is the first woman known to modern historians who had absolute power over the ancient Moocha civilization. This was about 1,700 years ago. The Lady of Kau was buried with a splendid treasure of jewels and precious metals. Her body was covered in ornate tattoos depicting serpents, which were known to be a sign of her healing power, as well as spiders to show her weaving skill. She was also buried with a small trusted group to escort her into the afterlife, including a pair of priests, bodyguards, and a mysterious young teenage girl. But who was the Lady of Kau and the Moocha? She was probably the leader of the civilization, though historians can't actually say for certain. There are no historical writings describing her accomplishments. They only know she was wildly important because her tomb was more extravagant and filled with more wealth than any other Moocha tomb discovered to date. The Moocha culture flourished in the Andean region of South America for about 800 years in the Common Era, with their territory stretching across most of Peru's coastline. Although the exact reason for their demise is unknown, it is a popular belief that the Moocha fell due to droughts, earthquakes, and flooding. Number 4. Drought Extinction. Unknown to most casual history enthusiasts, there was once a mysterious pocket of civilization in Central Asia. The region flourished in antiquity thanks to its tactical position on the ancient Silk Road. It had access to floodwater, irrigated land was easy to come by, and the region grew to about twice the size of old Mesopotamia. The region at the time was known as Transoxiana, or Land of the Thousand Cities. Today, this piece of land is in southern Kazakhstan near the city of Almaty. It's not clear exactly what the people who live there called themselves, though historians believe there were multiple civilizations living in the area. They traded, grew prosperous, and then began to decline with the invasion of the Mongols in the 13th century. The area recovered a bit but collapsed anyway in the 17th century because of a dramatically changed climate. A great drought descended upon the land, ruining crops and causing residents to flee. There is almost no trace of them or their great cities left today. Number 3. Tibetan Civilization. The capital of Tibet in modern times is the city of Lhasa. North of this great city is a vast landscape of nothingness about 15,000 feet above sea level. While it may look like a big pile of nothing today, it was once the scene of a great civilization's rise to power. Archaeologist John Belitza says that when Tibet rose in power about 2,500 years ago, it was a monumental society with amazing architecture, mining, regional trade, a civilized order, and a complex social structure. Scattered across Tibet today are abandoned castles, broken temples, and the ruins of mysterious structures that can't even be identified, let alone named. Tibet flourished into modern times until forces from the Qing dynasty in China conquered the area. Since then, Tibet has been firmly under the thumb of China's rule, especially after the communist invasion of 1950 that led to the overthrow of the Tibetan government and the famous Dalai Lama being exiled along with 100,000 native Tibetans in 1959. Number 2. Babylonia. There's a lot of confusion about the ancient Babylonians. A lot of people think that Babylon was its own great empire, but in fact, the city of Babylon was actually part of the state of Babylonia, located in Mesopotamia. In other words, Babylon was part of Mesopotamia and not its own civilization at all, at the beginning at least. Still, it grew into one of the biggest cities anywhere in the ancient world after being founded 4,000 years before today. At its peak, it was ruled by the great Hammurabi, who is known for his famous Hammurabi Code, which was the origin behind the eye for an eye saying. But here's the deal. Babylon did eventually become its own kingdom. Several centuries after the fall of Mesopotamia, a new succession of kings established the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which encompassed a huge patch of the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Babylon was still the capital city, and it became even more beautiful and extravagant. It was during the rule of Neo-Babylonia that thousands of Jews were forced into exile in the great city after the Babylonians defeated the kingdom of Judah. But as an empire, Neo-Babylonia didn't last long, only from 626 to 539 BC. That's hardly a single century. Arguably the greatest and most ruthless king of the Near East, King Cyrus the Great of Persia, showed up in 539 and gave Babylon a spanking, destroying the legendary city and reducing it to dust for the rest of time. Number 1. Phoenicia. Phoenicia is one of the most unique ancient civilizations that is often just as misunderstood as Babylonia. The Phoenicians were not actually part of a single country. Instead, the Phoenicians were a group of people who lived in the eastern Mediterranean in 4 major cities. Each city was independent and in a constant rivalry with the others. Still, the Phoenicians worked together as a confederation of maritime traders. In other words, they ruled the area's trade. Even though each city was independent, they prospered as a whole by dominating the local industries and controlling trade routes. The Phoenicians go as far back as 1500 BC. Amazingly, they also managed to sustain themselves as a people for quite some time. All the way until the 8th century BC, the Phoenicians dominated trading posts in the Mediterranean. Even the Great Carthage began life as a Phoenician trading colony in 814 BC, and they grew up to fight the Romans. It's even said that the Phoenicians circumnavigated Africa around 600 BC and explored all the way to Great Britain. But like every other civilization in the area, the Phoenicians fell to the mighty Persians. They were decimated in 539 BC. 200 years later, allowing Alexander the Great to destroy what wasn't already in ruins.
The Water Palace. One of the most unbelievable sights in all of India is a gorgeous palace called Jal Mahal. It's a water palace with an amazing castle that seems to float in the middle of Sagar Lake, as if taken straight from Shangri-La. The palace has high sand-colored stone walls, which reflect beautifully from the deep blue lake waters. Plus, there is a lovely garden sprouting out from the top of the palace, making it look truly unique. It is one of the most photographed places in the country, and almost looks like it shouldn't even exist. It's straight out of a fairy tale. The amazing thing is how the solid stone walls are able to hold back the millions of liters of water trying to get in. The palace was designed using special lime mortar that had prevented a single water leak for the past 250 years. But when was this amazing place built? The water palace was constructed hundreds of years ago, back in 1750, which actually isn't that long ago. It was made by Maharaja Madho Singh I as a private retreat for himself and his gang of duck hunting friends. The palace was improved significantly in the 18th century and then later abandoned, turned into a miserable ruin, and revamped and restored recently by the Indian government about 10 years ago. 9. Reed Flute Cave. Reed Flute Cave looks like a magical cavern from a princess storybook, but it's a very real place. It's located in a small suburb in China, just a few miles from the Guilin city center. The cave is about 787 feet deep and goes on for nearly 2,000 feet. It's filled with incredible stalagmites, stalactites, tall stone pillars, and beautiful stone walls. It's been forming for the past 180 million years. Today, it's known to the locals as the Palace of Natural Art. But what makes this cave so spectacular? It's because of how radiantly gorgeous it is inside. Upon entering the cave, the first thing visitors notice is just how bright it is. All the rock walls are shining with rainbow colors. Instead of being a dreary dark cave, it's a rainbow wonderland. There's an underground lake flowing through the cave that sends dazzling reflections sparkling across the ceiling and walls, making the natural beauty that much more dynamic. When you step out of the cave, you'll find reeds growing and thriving outside the mysterious cave, which can be used to make flutes. That's actually how the cave was named. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing in the midst of the reeds, breathing the fresh air and catching the soothing music of the flute. Outside the cave, it's a perfect, tranquil place where China's Thoreau may live. Amazingly, the cave was only discovered in the 1940s by Japanese troops fleeing the war. They stumbled in by total accident. The government opened it up as a tourist destination and installed the lights themselves. Unfortunately, the rainbow colors aren't actually natural, but how cool would that be? 8. The Bone Church. In the country of Czech, there is a Gothic church unlike any other on the planet. It's near the small city of Kutna Hora and looks like something taken from some kind of German bedtime story. It's called the Bone Church, and it's constructed from the bones of about 30,000 people who died from the plague. Okay, it just went from cool and interesting to creepy real quick. This is one of the weirdest places on Earth, and definitely a must-see for the morbidly inclined. According to National Geographic, a local abbot brought sacred soil all the way from Jerusalem in the 13th century back to this church and spread it in the cemetery. Word got out to the public, and suddenly everyone wanted to be buried here. But shortly after, when the plague descended on Europe, people began dying in droves. 30,000 people died from the plague and were added to plots here. And then the Crusades added another 10,000 corpses. Literally, bodies on bodies on bodies. There weren't enough plots to bury the dead. And in the 15th century, many of the bones began being moved into the church and shaped into decorations. A local woodcarver crafted an unforgettable interior of bleached human bone. Today, the church is still standing. It looks like the evil lair of some cannibal king. Would you like to visit a church made of bones? Do you think it's scary or beautiful? Let us know in the comment section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 7. Door to Hell. As hard as it is to believe, there is a door to hell located in the wastelands of Turkmenistan. Yes, the opening to the underworld exists, and it's in Asia. Deep in the brutally hot and terribly dry Karakum Desert, close to the tiny town of Darvaza, there is a hole in the ground about 230 feet wide. The hole has been on fire for the last 5 decades. It's technically a gas crater, though it looks more like the gates to hell. The fiery glow constantly coming out of the hole can be seen for miles in the distance. But just how did such a terrifying hole of burning fire come to exist in such a remote place? The creation of the hole goes back to the year 1971. A Soviet drilling company was looking for oil when they accidentally punched a hole into an underground gas cavern. The ground beneath their feet collapsed. The drilling rig fell into the hole, and poisonous fumes squirted out into the air. To stop an environmental catastrophe, the Soviets thought it would be best to light the gas on fire. They thought the gas would run out and the fire would eventually just stop burning in just a couple of weeks. But 50 years later, the flames are still present, and some are convinced the Soviets punched a hole into hell. Will the fire ever go out? It's a hot debate. 6. Ancient Mountain City. There is an ancient city on top of a mountain in the country of Sri Lanka that looks like something out of a fantasy novel. The ruined city is called Sigiriya, and it has some unique features not found anywhere else on the planet. It includes a moat, tall wall fortifications, landscape gardens, and a mysterious monastery. The truly fascinating thing about the city, though, is that it's sitting about 800 feet in the sky, on top of a granite rock. The only way to the top of the mountain city is up an extremely precarious staircase, and it is definitely not an easy journey. It doesn't help that the mountain is also full of spiders, because why wouldn't it be? The city itself was built for King Kasyapa around 477 AD. It was meant to be an impregnable fortress where the king could hide out from his enemies. However, it turned out that having a fortress on top of a mountain was a bad idea, because it could be easily sieged. Who knew? The king died when his half-brother showed up to steal the crown, and the mountain city was abandoned. It wasn't discovered again until colonial archaeologists stumbled upon it in the 1800s. It is now a tourist destination you can visit today, but you'll have to climb those stairs. 5. Fingal's Cave. There is no place on Earth quite like Fingal's Cave in Scotland. It's a unique structure, a sea cave formed entirely from hexagonal basalt columns. These are the same columns which form the Giant's Causeway. They are unique to Scotland and considered to be one of the true wonders of the natural world. Fingal's Cave doesn't look like it should even exist. Upon entering the cave, whether by the crude walkway of hexagon rock columns or by sea, you immediately enter what almost feels like the underworld. It's creepy. The columns are so strange that they blow people's minds, and the way it was formed is just as interesting. While Fingal's Cave may look built by hand, it was actually created roughly 60 million years ago by volcanic eruptions. The lava hardened, then cooled and shrank and cracked. The cycle of life is a beautiful thing. The cracks were at angles of 120 degrees, creating the hexagons you see today. The origin of the name, Fingal's Cave, is wrapped in a curious myth. Once upon a time, Finn MacCumhail or Fingal was possibly an Irish general who had a group of extremely faithful warriors, comparable to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Fingal is supposed to have been the father of Ossian, traditional bard of the Gaels. Gaels migrated into Scotland from Ireland until the Norsemen began their raids on the Scottish coast, and the stories of Fingal would doubtless have come across too. Soon he became very well known in Scotland and praised by the Ossianic heroic songs and verses. His name was a natural choice to assign to this dramatic and awe-inspiring cavern. 4. The Alexandria Catacombs. Out of all the tombs in Egypt, the Alexandria Catacombs are hands down the most insane. These catacombs don't look like any other necropolis in the world and are reminiscent of something out of Lord of the Rings. Journeying into these catacombs is like stepping into another world. You half expect zombie Draugr to rise from their tombs and try to eat you. Alexander the Great originally established the city of Alexandria. He was one of the most famous Greek kings and army leaders and one of the greatest conquerors in history. These are the catacombs of Kom el Shukafa, one of the largest burial sites in all of Egypt. It dates back to the times of Greco-Roman Egypt, only discovered in the 20th century, completely by accident, when a donkey fell through the hidden entrance. The way into the catacombs is a little treacherous. You have to go down a winding staircase that descends 115 feet into the ground. Inside the catacombs is a mixture of ancient architecture, including decorative art and a variety of elements that are Roman, Hellenistic, Egyptian, and Pharaonic. The tomb was built in the 2nd century AD. It has 3 separate levels filled with creepy catacomb tombs, and part of it is even submerged underwater. 3. Hang Son Doong. Hang Son Doong is the largest cave in the world. It's mysterious and unbelievable. The cave is located deep in the jungle of central Vietnam. Amazingly, it was only discovered a few years ago when a local farmer needed shelter from a passing storm. He discovered the entrance of the cave and went inside. He was then shocked to uncover a forgotten landscape, probably last seen by the dinosaurs. The ceiling is over 300 feet high. The cave itself is filled with bizarre bird and monkey species, and even today, there have been more visitors to the peak of Mount Everest than inside the cave. It's such a unique ecosystem and so unbothered by humans that to let people inside would be its doom. The Hang Son Doong cave is literally a world of its own. It has clouds inside of it, underground rivers and streams, unique fauna and animals, and its very own atmosphere. It's barely even been explored. Seeing as the first scientists only made their way into the cave back in 2010, the entrance alone is big enough to house an entire city block. Imagine the magic the farmer must have felt when he discovered it. 2. The Medicine Hat Geoglyph. In Canada, just 40 miles from the small city of Medicine Hat, there is a place known as the Indian Head Geoglyph, or the Badlands Guardian. At first, it doesn't seem like a real thing. The pictures look like they've been edited or somehow manipulated to create the face of a Native American in the low hills. But the geoglyph is very real. A lot like the strange geoglyphs in Peru, the Nazca lines. It can only be seen from the air. There are also probably more of them at one point, but they have been destroyed by the weather. According to a research paper commissioned by the Earth International Research Society, the mysterious site is related to an early Mesoamerican culture that thrived in Canada between 900 BC and 1500 AD. Up until recently, nobody thought such a thing could exist, as there's nothing else like it in all of Canada. We still don't know which culture carved the face into the ground, or why they would, or who they thought would see it. It's also a pretty new discovery, only spotted in 2005 thanks to Google Earth. 1. Crystal Cave. In Mexico, there is a cave of crystals about 900 feet underground that happens to be one of the most dangerous caves in the world. This place is surreal. It's located near Nika and first discovered by miners in the year 2000, looking for fresh ore deposits. The cave is filled with milky white crystals, some of which are up to 3 feet wide and over 36 feet long, or bigger than telephone poles. These are beams of pure gypsum, and the cave itself looks like part of some weird underground treasure cavern. The deposits formed because of magma-heated waters, which cooled over thousands of years and allowed the gypsum to grow in an environment of pure calcium and sulfate. As for why the cave is so dangerous, it's actually a very harsh environment. The conditions inside the cave are too brutal for a human. The humidity level is over 90%, and the air temperature is over 122 degrees Fahrenheit. In this environment, a person will sweat themselves dry, then shrivel up and die in under 20 minutes.
Number 10. Zeljava Air Base. The Zeljava Air Base is located on the border between Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. It was once a military installation for the Yugoslavian army, complete with hangars, advanced communication centers, barracks, and even a ballistic missile early warning system. But what makes the airbase especially unique is that it was considered indestructible because Yugoslavia built it inside of a mountain. They literally hollowed out a mountain and then put their airbase inside of it. This protected the base from both destruction and observation from outside forces. Even though Yugoslavia didn't see much military action during during World War II, the country still made military upgrades after the war, especially after seeing feats of strength such as the US's nuclear bombs on Japan. The tiny country didn't want to get left behind in case of attack. Near the end of the Cold War, there didn't seem to be much use for a secret mountain bunker, but it continued functioning until the Croatian War of Independence, fought between 1991 and 1995. Yugoslavia was torn apart. It was a bloody and tumultuous time for Southeast Europe. And the airbase was finally destroyed and abandoned in May of 1992 by the Serbian military using over 56 tons, 50,802 kilograms of explosives. Ever since, the airbase has been a blackened ruin. It's still standing inside the mountain, but it's nothing more than a charred husk left for brave explorers. Though exploring the abandoned Zeljava airbase is discouraged since there still may be hidden active landmines around the military base. Number 9. Devil's Slide Bunkers. The bunker of Devil's Peak on the California coast was built during World War II as an observation station and was one part of a much larger facility. During its service, a designated watcher was stationed at the top of the bunker with binoculars to keep lookout across the sea for enemy ships. If they spotted anything, they were to radio to the nearby guns, who would then sink the enemy vessel before it could reach the shore. No ships ever attacked the American coastline though, and it proved to be a giant waste of money and resources. Then, when modern missile defenses came around in the 1940s, the bunker became useless and it was later abandoned in 1949. Today, the Devil's Slide bunker still remains. The land was actually purchased by a private owner, and they left the bunker sitting alone on an isolated perch. The land the bunker was built on mostly has been removed for different construction purposes, but now the bunker is hanging precariously over the side of the cliff, looking like it could still slide into the ocean at any minute. It's also covered in graffiti and doesn't look much like a military installation any longer. But it just goes to show you should never judge something's history by what it looks like now. Number 8. The Duga 3 Missile Detection System. Deep in the peaceful forest of northern Ukraine near the exclusion zone of Chernobyl, there still stands the Duga 3 radar missile detection system. It was once a secret facility used by the Soviet Union. In fact, it was one of their most prized secret facilities, an incredible structure built from hundreds of antennas and turbines. Within the Soviet Union's communist empire, this was a technological marvel. It stands 492 feet and stretches over 2,000 feet. It was constructed in 1972 as a way for the Soviets to detect missiles being launched from the United States during the height of the Cold War. Because the structure was built from so many satellites and antenna, it was able to pick up signals from far away, thereby letting them know within 2 to 3 minutes when a ballistic missile was launched. However, as crazy as it sounds, Soviet scientists didn't quite understand how their creation worked, even though they were the ones who built it. It never really came in handy, and it was eventually abandoned when the Soviet Union collapsed. Before it was abandoned and seen as a complete waste of space, the Soviets did all they could to keep it a secret. According to CNN, on local maps, they actually marked it as a children's camp and even put a bus stop on the road near the facility in case someone drove by. Then, when it began operations in 1976, it created a pulse like a woodpecker that could be heard all over the world, sparking conspiracy theories that the Soviets were trying to control the weather and even that they were trying to mind control Western nations using low-frequency radio waves. Some speculate that the antenna were built close to the Chernobyl power plant to have easy access to nuclear energy. To put it into perspective, Duga 3 cost twice as much to build as Chernobyl itself. That just shows how high the Soviets' hopes were for the detection system. Despite its potential, the site was located too close to the exclusion zone after Chernobyl's meltdown, making the radar useless as it was abandoned for nearly decades. Number 7. Khe Sanh. Khe Sanh was the scene of a legendary battle during the Vietnam War. The battle began on January 21, 1968. The United States Marines had a garrison on Khe Sanh, a remote mountain near the border of Cambodia and Vietnam. To the Americans, it was a critical airstrip for resupplying. The base was needed to prevent a North Vietnamese presence from sneaking into southern Vietnam. The People's Army of North Vietnam targeted the base at Khe Sanh and carried out large artillery bombardment, but the Marines held on way longer than expected and fought back for 77 days. It turned into one of the longest and most devastating battles of the entire war. After 3 months, the Americans had no choice but to fully evacuate the site. The North Vietnamese moved in and claimed the base as their own. They then brought pieces of wreckage from the other battlefields and put it on display to honor their victory. But after the war, the base was no longer needed, and it became abandoned. Today, it's a grim reminder of the battle between North and South Vietnam. Number 6. The Nakoma Pyramid. In North Dakota, there's a place called Nakoma. From the outside, it looks like some sort of ancient pyramid structure, but really it was created by the US itself. Nakoma cost the government about $6 billion to make. It was a failed experiment and one of the most expensive military disasters on US soil ever that we know about, at least. The site consists of large missile silos, a radar system shaped like an ancient Egyptian pyramid, and launching silos for surface-to-air missiles. These missiles were to be equipped with thermonuclear warheads. The radar system was designed to track missiles coming in from Russia. When a missile from Russia was detected, a friendly missile would launch from its silo and then shoot the unfriendly missile down over Canadian soil. Here's why the facility failed. First of all, it was built in the 1960s during the Cold War, a time when building completely ridiculous things in the name of defense seemed like a good idea. The money used to safeguard and keep the complex up and running proved too much for the little use it actually got. Also, concerns were raised over its effectiveness. People were worried about the dangers of detonating a nuclear warhead over friendly territory, even if it was defensive. I'm sure Canada wouldn't have appreciated a missile being blown up over their country. In the end, the program got shut down. The crazy part is that it was shut down after being fully operational for only 3 days. The series of tunnels underground were flooded, everything was removed, and today Nakoma is an abandoned military shell in the middle of nowhere. Number 5. Truk Lagoon. The Truk Lagoon is filled with hundreds of warships and attack planes from World War II left abandoned and wasting away at the bottom of the sea. Truk Lagoon was once the base of the Imperial Japanese Navy's 4th Fleet. It was considered to be the strongest naval base anywhere in the Pacific other than Pearl Harbor. Well, in February of 1944, the US began bombing it in retaliation to the Pearl Harbor attack a few years prior. Within just a few months, the base was destroyed. Throughout the attacks and the fighting, heaps and heaps of ships, planes, and submarines were lost in the calm blue waters surrounding the warbase, and they still remain to this very day at the bottom of the lagoon. But instead of being weapons of war like their intended purpose, these vehicles now serve as houses for fish. It's also become a popular dive spot with tourists, American and Japanese alike, who want to pay their respects to all war heroes. Number 4. Scola Tower. The Scola Tower in Italy is an old, half-ruined military compound sticking out of the Gulf of Poets in western Italy. It stands around 42 feet, not much is left of the structure today, it's really just a crumbling ruin. But behind the decaying walls, it's hiding an extraordinary history. The tower was built by the Senate of the Republic of Genoa back in 1606. The entire tower was literally built on a rock off the coast of the island of Palmaria. It was part of a larger defensive system of towers and fortresses all along the coastline to protect the area from attacks, and was made to hold about 8 soldiers and a captain. There were 10 cannons placed on the top of the tower designed to shoot down any enemy coming in from the sea, though they didn't do a very good job. The walls were built 4 feet, 1.2 meters thick, which is probably the only reason some of the tower still stands today. The tower was bombarded in June of 1800 when the British tried to take out Napoleon's troops in the region. The British Navy came in and bombarded everything, destroying much of the tower. It wasn't functional afterwards and was abandoned. Nobody ever saw a good reason to rebuild it, and so it was left on its foundation rock. In the early 1900s, the Italian Navy used it for target practice. There's still remnants of decades-old shells littered on the structure. Centuries after its construction in 1976, the tower was turned into a tourist attraction. It continues to serve as a beautiful seaside beacon and historical monument to this day. Number 3. Flak Tower. In North Berlin, the Flak Towers stand as a constant reminder of the horrors of World War II. The towers were built in a landscaped park from the 1800s. There's an open-air swimming pool, a structure garden, vineyard, and even playgrounds for kids. And amidst all these great public features, there are 2 grizzled towers from the 1940s that were built thanks to the one and only Adolf Hitler. The towers were constructed after Allied forces air raids on German cities. Hitler instructed for thousands of air raid shelters to be built and for defensive towers to go up. The Flak Towers were equipped with anti-aircraft guns designed to defend the nearby factories against any potential attacks. The towers were also part of a larger shelter structure that could protect tens of thousands of citizens in the event of a mass bombing. When the war was finished, French soldiers took down all the towers in the city except for the 2 in North Berlin. It wasn't because they were feeling nostalgic, it was because demolishing them seemed too dangerous and expensive. The tower pieces could have fallen on the nearby train tracks, which at the time were under Soviet administration. Blowing up the towers could have caused a problem between the French and Russians, so they were left alone. Today, they're still standing as a popular tourist attraction. Number 2. LA-88 Missile Site. The LA-88 missile site is one of just a few dozen missile bases once installed throughout Los Angeles to protect the civilian population in the case of a Soviet attack. The missile base was in operation from 1957 to 1954. The site was considered a vital asset for defensive measures, and the Army did all they could to protect it. They even used dogs to patrol the area around the missile launch site, looking for anything or anyone suspicious. After the 70s, the missile site was seen as obsolete, no longer necessary, and was soon abandoned. But they never destroyed the facility, and it still stands today, owned by the California Civilian Conservation Corps. It's mostly a bunch of hollowed buildings and graffiti. You probably wouldn't even know you were standing inside of an old missile base, but it's still there. As of 2008, the site was heavily damaged by wildfires. Sometime around then, it also began being used as a training site for SWAT teams, but mostly it remains as a popular urban explorer destination. Number 1. Fort Terry. Fort Terry was established by the United States government sometime in 1897. Constructed on Plum Island outside of Long Island, it was part of a chain of fortifications to safeguard the eastern entrance to the Long Island Sound. This was done so that no pesky invaders could swoop into New York and cause any damage during the early part of the 20th century. But as you can imagine, this kind of fortress was not useful for very long. According to the Ferguson Museum, it was deactivated in 1949 and Plum Island was turned into a research base. In 1952, Fort Terry was transformed into a creepy research facility for military animals and biological warfare. Nobody knows exactly what went on here, but the facility was in use, presumably devising even more nefarious biological weapons until 1969, when the US allegedly stopped researching biological weapons. Today, Fort Terry is an abandoned ruin with a mysterious history. Thanks for watching.